It was the wildest of its kind, a car which was described as a monster by European teams when they saw it, and one which was continually developed throughout its 7-year racing career. It was a car which grabbed the attention from the moment it first ran. This is the story of the Mooncraft Lotus Evora GT300. The car's Tokai Dream 28 team was well known in the Japanese Super GT Championship, having raced in the GT300 class with a VMAC and more famously the Mooncraft Shiden, which it won 4 races with, and the 2007 Teams Championship. The Shiden was actually a converted Riley Daytona prototype racing in a GT Championship. There's a video on it in the link above. Rule changes had seen the Shiden banned ahead of the 2013 season, and the team knew that it would have to acquire a new car to race in Super GT. Super GT has 2 classes, loosely based on the power of the engines in the cars, and very loosely at that. GT500 is for works-back teams with cars producing 500 brake horsepower. They do have a lot more power than that in reality. While GT300 is for private teams and Subaru, we'll have to get back to that, with cars that have about 300 brake horsepower. In reality, of course, they have much more than that as well. From 2014 until now, GT300 has been run for cars conforming to any one of 3 completely separate rulebooks: FIA GT3, JAF GT300 for vaguely production-based cars like the Toyota Prius, obviously, and finally the mother chassis cars. The mother chassis rules were introduced in 2014 so that private Japanese motorsport engineering companies would have the ability to develop and race a car based on a set of common components. It was essentially quite similar to the Class 1 regulations used in GT500 and as well in DTM, where all of the cars shared the same basic chassis and a package of other mechanical components. The mother chassis cars also had a complete package of parts ranging from a basic kit of the minimum required bits and pieces to complete a car, as well as all the way up to a complete package, the Dome GT86. There's a video on that and the very early development of the mother chassis and the mother chassis rules in the link above. Of course, when the Mooncraft Shiden was banned, the car's Tokai Dream 28 team couldn't switch to a mother chassis car because those rules didn't exist at the time. They were still to be introduced. So the team opted to buy a McLaren MP412C GT3 car, and to be honest, they didn't really get on with it all that well in either the 2013 or the 2014 seasons, and only twice managed to score points with it. When the mother chassis rules were introduced, the team knew that it had to build a car to those regulations. So the team announced that it would contest the GT300 category of Super GT starting from the 2015 season. The car the team selected to use was actually something of a surprise. The new mother chassis concept wasn't a great surprise at all. Of course, they'd already announced it, and it would be designed by Takuya Yura of Mooncraft, who was responsible for the Shiden. That also wasn't a big surprise. The surprise was it would be based on the Lotus Evora. This was a fascinating choice, as the rules stated that the engine used in the car must be located in the car in the same position as it is in the road car. As the Evora is a mid-engined car, this would be the first mid-engined mother chassis car. Mooncraft and Yura had not actually initially intended to build the Evora into a GT300 car, and they actively looked around for a suitable alternative base car, ultimately settling on the Evora for reasons Yura described as commercial and engineering reasons. One of those projects considered was a mother chassis version of the Mooncraft Shiden. Initial sketches of that car were made, both of a road-going and a racing version, but they never got built. I've also seen reference to a Maserati mother chassis car, but never really heard anything more about it, and it may have been a mistranslation. The team's driver and owner Kazuo Takahashi was actually the key person in deciding the choice of a base model car. The businessman and driver wanted to race a mid-engined car, as all of the Super GT cars he'd raced previously were mid-engined, so the front-engined GT86 or something similar wasn't really an option for him, and notably he also had many Lotus dealerships in Japan as part of his business, so a Lotus actually wasn't a surprising choice when you really think about it. it. And the first car that Mooncraft looked at building into a mother chassis car was the Lotus Elise. Notably, this model had actually raced, or attempted to race at least, in Super GT before with the Elise 300RR back in 2005. However, Mooncraft felt that the dimensions of the Elise didn't really suit the mother chassis rules, but the larger Evora chassis did, so that's what they chose to use. The aerodynamics of the car were unsurprisingly a major focus for Mooncraft, and the GT300 Evora had countless interesting details. The development was what could only be called comprehensive. Mooncraft's small in-house wind tunnel was used to develop the car, and it features a moving ground plane or a rolling road. The Mooncraft tunnel was capable of only taking a quarter-scale model of the car, and bear in mind the Evora is still quite a small car, so it is a really quite small wind tunnel. But looking at the images I have of the car's development, it does look to me like a number of different wind tunnel models were used, including this one which was completely 3D printed. Here you can see a very early version of the Evora's bodywork in the wind tunnel. Extensive CFD work was also conducted. Mooncraft actually seemed really keen to use pretty much every technology at its disposal on the Evora GT300, and it was willing to experiment with new technologies as well. The company continually sought to improve its technology and its techniques, as well as improve the Lotus GT300 aerodynamics, and despite the small size of the wind tunnel, it actually used a lot of technology, such as here a particle image velocimetry system was installed and used to optimize the rear wing of the Evora. A lot of work also went into continually improving the correlation between the wind tunnel and CFD systems. Throughout the life of the car, there were continual bodywork changes, especially around the trailing edges of the front fenders, and these were sometimes changed like wing angles to aid car setup. There were different elements that they could use in there, and sometimes they even added a gurney to the trailing edge. Note the asymmetric mirror layout on the car as well. That was a feature of the car from its very beginning right the way through its life. A lot of different rear wing end plate solutions were trialled in the wing tunnel to get that perfect match between wing and end plate. A notable set of experiments was conducted on the rear wing mounting points themselves. While swan neck rear wing mountings were nothing new, the Mooncraft team at the time had not actually trialled them, so a lot of work went into developing and evaluating a swan neck mounting system on the Lotus rear wing, and this was actually introduced for the 2020 season. Mooncraft actually found that the swan necks gave their biggest gains in yaw when you compared it to a conventional wing mounting from the underside, and the new mountings actually improved downforce by 1% when you compared like for like in yaw. Indeed, the drivers of the Lotus actually commented that with the exact same wing profile but just mounted differently, they could feel the difference in rear load in the first sector at Suzuka through all the S's, or in 100R at Fuji Speedway when back-to-back tests were conducted. One really notable feature of the Lotus was the bizarre exhaust positioning on the extreme rear of the car. Initially the team were quite reluctant to explain this concept, but years later they actually did, and it's what you might imagine. In the wind tunnel, the team had experimented with exhaust gas simulation and found that this layout was advantageous. While it's not really a blown diffuser in any sense, the exhaust plumes were found to help the underfloor airflow as a result of pressure changes in the immediate wake of the car, I assume just on the trailing edge of the floor. Here's some really nice images of the initial build of the Evora bodywork, and almost all of that work was done in-house at Mooncraft using their own composites facility. Mooncraft never actually really stopped developing the Evora across its entire life. Just look at the front dive plane area of the car seen here, one of many different iterations seen at the front of the car. Once the overall body shape was set though, the mechanical layout of the car could be addressed, and much of this was defined in the mother chassis regulations. The mother chassis rules limited a lot of the parts of the car, the uprights, the floor, the engine, the transmission internals, the ECU for some reason, and a host of other parts, and not least the chassis itself, were all fixed in the regulation. For example, the mother chassis rules dictated a lot of the mechanical setup of the car in general, with the engine restricted to the off-the-shelf GTA branded V8, which in reality was a Nissan VK45DE engine, a 4.5 litre, normally aspirated V8, exactly as used in LMP2. However, while the Evora production car had a transverse mid-mounted Toyota V6 engine, the GT300 car was able to fit its V8 longitudinally and have it semi-stressed. The transmission was also part of the mother chassis package. A Hewland LLS was a mandatory part, though the Evora was able to use a bespoke magnesium casing to save weight at the rear of the car. For the same reason, an AP Racing multi-plate carbon clutch was used rather than the standard mother chassis part, which was supplied by Tilton and was a bit heavier. As a result of the bespoke transmission casing, the Mooncraft engineers engineers had some additional freedoms on the rear suspension layout, with the suspension pickup points partly on the transmission casing and partly on the bell housing. Öhlins dampers were used rather than the dome dampers which were included in the mother chassis package. The magnesium casing was replaced for the 2016 season as the team felt it needed to have a wider range of mounting points for ancillary components on that casing, so an aluminium casing was developed to replace it. This was heavier, but it resulted in better overall reliability for the car, which in turn resulted in better performance. In fact, in its debut seasons, the Evora had an awful lot of reliability problems, and it struggled to finish races at all. The air conditioning would fail frequently, and there were constant alternator issues as well, and even starting the engine was something of a challenge. These issues were generally down to the midship layout of the car, something that the mother chassis was designed for, but not primarily designed for. An example of this is the engine's oil system. The tub had a recess in it to accommodate the oil tank, but it was at the front of the tub and not the rear. So if the team had used that oil tank recess, the car would have had to feature extremely long and complex and heavy oil lines, so the oil tank had to be housed somewhere else on the Lotus. A similar issue was the cause of the alternator and air conditioning failures as well. These systems were initially located in the prop shaft tunnel at the base of the chassis, and they were driven by belts, but there was no space in that location for any kind of gearing on those units, and as a result, the air conditioner, for example, would over-rev, overheat, and ultimately fail. It was later relocated and the drive taken from elsewhere on the powertrain. Even simply getting air to the engine wasn't always easy. While the majority of the cooling system was located in the front of the car like you might expect, the engine was of course directly behind the back of the chassis, which made the intake layout a little bit tougher. Initially, Lotus had its engine air intake mounted in a scoop on the roof of the car, but it was found that this didn't have enough ram air effect, so the intakes were then moved to the top of the rear bodywork behind the rear window, but it was found that here the intake temperatures were just too high. So eventually the intake was moved to a side scoop on the side of the car, and all of these layouts were of course tested extensively in both the Mooncraft wind tunnel and in CFD. Mooncraft also felt that in a midship layout, the semi-stressed engine and common mounting plate as part of the mother chassis package seriously lacked in rigidity. Strictly speaking, there were actually two Evora GT300 chassis. The car used between 2015 and 2017 was replaced with a new tub for the 2018 season. This tub had a revised mounting plate on it. Indeed, the 2018 upgrade went beyond that. It was quite significant, and the whole car was reworked with material thicknesses on every component being reviewed. The rear mounting of the car to frame and house the engine was extended and redesigned, and the car's overall stiffness was significantly improved. In the end, the Evora turned up with a completely different suspension geometry compared to the GT86 mother chassis car, and with the success ballast the car was occasionally hit with, that was all mounted at the front of the car, which actually improved the weight distribution of the car overall, so the ballast wasn't necessarily a bad thing. So how much of the road-going Evora made it onto the race car? Well, not a lot. Perhaps only the badges and maybe the headlight and tail light lenses, but I'm not actually sure about that. But the badges were definitely from a production Lotus. Everything else on the car was either bespoke and manufactured by Mooncraft or part of the mother chassis package. A notable characteristic of the Evora on track was how kind it was to its tyres. It could run much longer stints than other cars, including other mother chassis cars, and this allowed it to keep its faster driver in the car for longer and its slower driver in the car for less time. The reasons given for this excellent tyre performance were simply and largely related to the weight distribution of the car. It was better than a front engine layout essentially. However, having Yokohama's test driver as one of your race drivers for part of its life certainly didn't hurt those projects either. The reliability and teething troubles for the Evora saw it finish 17th in the championship in its debut season 2015, but the car clearly had some strong performance potential. But 2016 and 2017 were not good seasons either, with the car again failing to score any points at all. But the second iteration of the Evora with that stiffer chassis came along in 2018 with a lot of optimism, but it too failed to score any points in either that year or the 2019 season. Takahashi retired at the end of 2019 and purchased the Caterham Car Company, not just a Caterham, the entire company, and his team continued to race with his Lotus, though he took a different role. Things finally came good in the 2020 season, and the Lotus finally scored its maiden Super GT win at Fuji Speedway and followed it up with with a podium. While it again failed to score any points for the rest of that season, those early results were good enough to give it 10th in the championship. And in 2021, the team partners with Inging and switched to Bridgestone tyres for what would be its final season in Super GT. It scored again a single win, and in 2022, the team ultimately replaced the Lotus with an APR-built GR86, a car we'll have to get back to. Ultimately, no other team or tuner ever tried to build a mid-engined mother chassis car, which I think is a bit of a shame actually. In fact, when this car contested the Suzuka 1000 kilometers against the European GT3 teams, it really broke up the monotony of GT3 at that race. So I do wonder what's next for GT300, and we'll have to get back to, well, that. For now though, thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat reliability challenged tale from Japan, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon, somewhere in the pit lane. It's probably at the top of this mountain.